In the name of the beloved mighty I am presence, we call to the very heart of beloved Padmasambhava, beloved Lord Confucius, beloved Lord Lanto, by the purple fiery heart of Saint Germain, we draw down from the great causal body of the hierarchs of China the true strategies in peace and in war. Vajraguru Padme Siddhi Hum Om Aham Vajraguru Padme Siddhi Hum The 2,000-year-old writings of Sun Tzu on the art of war have endured to the present hour. They have become the handbook of Mao and other tacticians who understand the necessity of understanding strategy in peace and in war, the offensive and the defensive strategy. We are in a war. It is the war of Armageddon. It is not a skirmish. We have the daily battles within our world of the unconscious, of karma and personal momentums that we face on the path of discipleship. We have daily battles with those very forces that we find within, outplayed around us. And Jesus said, "Thine enemies shall be they of thine own household." And that is not limited to the family. It means the members within thyself. On a world scale, we see the multiplication of the belief in the lie of the human consciousness and its erroneous ways over and over again, so that the specters of war and mass hatred are embodied by large numbers and therefore more fearsome. So we see planetary dragons as planetary momentums of evil, and we find that in order to combat them, we must unite forces with those of the light who see and understand the danger, who know the enemy and who know the self. Our observation, that is, of the brothers in white, is that the strategy of peace and war must be understood. But if the individual have not discipleship as a leader or discipleship as a follower, he will not be able to implement these strategies. And therefore, to make use of the great teachings of Lord Confucius and Lord Lanto, we go back to the threefold flame of the heart, discipleship. For unless this flame be developed, one can be neither a trusted leader nor a trusted follower. All of us in this tent of the Lord, of the people Israel, desire to fall under one of these two categories. In truth, each one of us at given moments must be both. Sometimes we find ourselves the only one with a cool head that knows what to do with any number of people, life streams, livestock, that must be led to safety or in the right direction. And sometimes we recognize a leader greater than ourselves and we instantly follow. And thus those beneath us on the scale of hierarchy are the followers of the light of our hearts. Those above us become our leaders. And if we have expertise, spiritually or professionally, in some area, we may find ourselves advising those in hierarchy above us, or lending our heart's momentum to those beneath us, who also may have some area of expertise. Thus, in the field of physical aptitudes and skills developed, an individual may be capable of directing a group of people, but he may lack the spiritual attainment that must go hand in hand with it, and therefore be subject to errors of judgment rather than errors of knowledge. He may have perfect knowledge in his field, but he may not have a balanced threefold flame to exercise right judgment for a plan of action. We understand that the light comes forth from the great central sun in a mighty tide, and that light is oncoming to swallow up the corresponding tide of darkness which we find in the eruption of planetary karma on planet Earth and other systems of worlds. The juxtaposition of light and darkness must tell us that in the very movement of light, in the midst of light, there is the ensouling of light by the armies of Lord Maitreya, who figures in the book of Revelation as the Word, who is known as the faithful and true. Therefore he comes robed in white, and the saints robed in white are with him. Archangel Michael has his legions. Every hierarch of light has his legions. You ought to assume that your mighty I Am Presence and Christ's Self has angels in the service of the cause of righteousness, and that when you take up the cause of righteousness, ministering angels will assist you by embodying an extraordinary light, which if placed all within your chakras would be like the overloading of an electrical transformer. Thus God multiplies himself over and over again for the embodiment of that light which is intended to swallow up the darkness of Armageddon. That which is held within your chakras and within your heart is intended to be sufficient unto the karma that is also held in your being. But because we have allowed the dweller on the threshold to wax strong and become a beast, and then a dragon in our personal Armageddon, we find that the soul that has not fully united with Christ is not able to even deal with the carnal mind that resides in the temple and creates the warring in the members. Because the storing of light in the chakras has not provided sufficient ammunition, as it were, to defeat the darkness, God has established a chain of hierarchy and grace through Jesus Christ, so that when we will to move upward, the downward momentum and gravity of our own consciousness does not overtake us, as Peter was overtaken symbolically by the astral plane or the sea when he was to sink beneath the waves. He required the hand of Christ to overcome his own personal momentums of fear and doubt. So we all need the person of Christ, who is next on the ladder of attainment in hierarchy, and we have a conscientious sense of responsibility that many need us who are lower on the scale. It is proper to assess one's own magnitude of light, to know what one's strength is and what one requires from the Lord and the Lord's host. It is like a general analyzing the troops, their numbers, their preparation, how many tanks, how much he has to meet the enemy, and at the same time knowing that enemy. Therefore, in the case of hierarchy and in the case of the Christ consciousness, we garner that which we call forth. And when we meet an enemy within that seems all-consuming and all-powerful, as an ancient record of hatred, for instance, looms just above the threshold of consciousness as a great burden to our soul, perhaps causing even physical diseases, and we feel ill-equipped to handle this, we understand that the Antakarana, the cosmic web of life, the intricate weaving of hierarchy, has positioned within itself hierarchs of light, ascended masters, sons of God, who are always ready to lend that hand of support. They are governed by cosmic law, and that law says that they may not transfer the light momentum of their attainment into a vessel that is not committed to use the light for the all-victorious, all-glorious purpose of bringing God's kingdom or consciousness into manifestation within the individual and within the planetary worlds. Thus you will understand how strictly this law is adhered to by the cosmic hierarchy. In the instance of the Lord Jesus Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane, he is there through the night. His soul is groaning and coming to grips with the initiation that he must choose by free will to enter into, to be or not to be the Savior of the world, to undergo the crucifixion. After many hours and experiencing the inability of his disciples to keep awake, to support him, to watch with me 1 hour, he offers this prayer unto the Father. Father, if thou be willing, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. In this commitment and surrender, in this vow of his absolute God being, the totality of himself, Jesus has aligned himself with the cosmic hierarchy until he commits to do God's will and to undergo the crucifixion. He is alone. No other figure appears in the garden. Not even the disciples can help him. But immediately after he has said these words, an angel came unto him and ministered unto him. The understanding of the entering into the great drama of the hand of heaven, the helper, must be noted by those who truly desire to make progress on Lord Maitreya's path of initiation, whereby we truly enter into the heart of Saint Germain and participate in the evolution of the Aquarian age. We are in a year of the dark cycle in Pisces. I see dribbles and drabbles of fear and doubt and anxiety and human questioning. Shall I do this or that? This way or that way? The dividing of oneself emotionally and mentally, and therefore a hesitancy that takes one from the nexus of precise action. Action where the works of God forge and win the soul's victory. The hesitation, therefore, to commit the totality of one's being unto the cause of God and the brotherhood deprives oneself of the very reinforcement which would enable one to overcome the fear and the doubt. So you see, at the altar of God, it is required that you have something into which God can anchor the great God mastery of the Piscean conqueror, which becomes the springboard to our victory in the Aquarian age through Saint Germain. Thus, when you present yourself to God as a servant, and you truly desire to have the maximum ability to do what God needs to have done, you must go through your Gethsemane. You must resolve the divisions and the splits within your being, the warring in the members, the desire to surrender, but then the pulling back and saying, well, I just want to keep a little bit of my pride, or a little bit of this momentum of the human consciousness here or there. I will not make a commitment, but I will see how the day goes, and as life comes to me, I will make my decisions one by one. Well, this is a free will choice, and you have the right to make it. But it ought to be an enlightened free will choice. And if you have the understanding that all of heaven waits to support and reinforce right action, but cannot pour into you the full momentum of their attainment without the vow to use that light solely for God's consciousness in you, then you will see that you will deprive yourself of the very support of hierarchy you need to do what you really want to do if you withhold the fullness of the cup of self. If you hold back a part of the price, you will go the path of initiation alone. If you meet that level of requirement, which is the standard of the Christ consciousness, then all of heaven will move to see to it that you are given the necessary strength, the reinforcement of chakras to perform the service that you are engaged in. So the half-hearted or the reluctant Chela that needs to be led around by the nose, you know, the gold ring in the nose that has to be pulled and that pulls in the other direction, constantly saying, show me, prove to me, give me a sign, and then I'll take 3 more steps, whereupon the individual says, give me another sign, prove it to me again, and a little bit further and a little bit further. Well, you see, this is the sign of the individual who lacks the commitment and the faith to know that if we serve God well and keep His covenants, He will do everything for us that is in His power to do. And if something that we need is not done for us, we know it is because our testing must be with us. Our strength is being tested, our ingenuity, our exercise of the mind of God. After all, we should soon become mummies in a tomb if we did nothing for ourselves. Just lie in bed a week and see how you feel. God necessitates that we exercise the totality of our cosmic consciousness. Therefore, understand the strategy of peace and war. Therefore, understand your role on the path of freedom. The internalization of God comes by right action. In order to take right action, you must be able to subdue within yourself all forces that move against right action, the anti-forces of that dweller on the threshold of the not-self. In order to subdue these, you need help. I need help. We all need God. But God gives us help through the Comforter, through the personification of Himself in His sons and daughters, in His angels and Elohim, hence the hosts of the Lord, hence the great white brotherhood, hence the law and the order of hierarchy. Thus we come back to the position of the individual. You each have a position on the cosmic scale and the ladder of life, if you are a striving one, if you are a sincere student of God. Therefore, to know thyself is to know thy strength. Jesus said, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. As thy day is, so shall thy strength be. Whatever you are called upon to do, whatever is the need of the hour, you will have the strength to overcome if you have entered this covenant with God. And if you find yourself lacking in strength, God will move in through His emissaries and supply you with that strength. Just test Him and see. It's a glorious moment to feel one's helplessness, one's total absence of strength, or the barrenness of one's mind for an idea or a thought or an understanding to do anything. But when one casts oneself upon the rock of Christ, allowing the human matrix to be broken, one finds oneself once again flooded with the creative power of cosmos. Thus, the commitment of the Son of God is the very first strategy of the warriors of peace. And thereby we enter into the path of balancing and expanding the threefold flame. The threefold flame is the fire that focuses your Christ consciousness. What is Christ consciousness? It is the awareness of the mind of God in Christ Jesus, in your holy Christ self, and it is anchored in your physical temple through the threefold flame that is sealed in the secret chamber of the heart. Thus the fire of love, the fire of wisdom, the fire of God's power is your ability to move, to think, to act, to defend, to overcome the subconscious of oneself and the planet, and to meet that same enemy in anyone who assails oneself. Forces embodied or disembodied. Knowledge of the enemy and oneself, knowledge of the ascended masters, enables us to call upon them when we know in our distress that it will take the combined momentum of Hercules and all the mighty Elohim to deliver a certain mandate that we have been given by Saint Germain. Knowing one another as disciples enables us to know upon whom we should call for help in our midst, our friends, our brothers, our fellow chelas. Therefore we look to each other, moving together in our dynamic decrees, to produce that rolling momentum and that magnet of the central sun, to draw down the corresponding intercession of heaven that enables us as a community of the Holy Spirit to even dare to tackle planetary problems, especially the social issues of our time affecting society, such as abortion, education, drugs, crime, and the way the consciousness of civilization is moving. Now I would like to read to you from Sun Tzu, Offensive Strategy. I would like you to think about yourself as the warrior of peace. I would like you to think of yourself as tackling the enemy of the dweller on the threshold, the momentums of the subconscious, the lines of the clock, the foes of your real self that you have encountered within and without. And now to listen to this strategy and consider how you might apply it. Sun Tzu said, generally in war, the best policy is to take a state intact. To ruin it is inferior to this. Do not put a premium on killing. Now, some people who become psychologically imbalanced cannot tolerate imperfection within themselves. So they declare war upon themselves through immense condemnation and destroy themselves instead of the enemy. Sun Tzu says, take a state intact. So take the whole man intact, and therefore bring into alignment and subject its members to your Christ consciousness. To capture the enemy's army is better than to destroy it. To take intact a battalion, a company, or a 5-man squad is better than to destroy them. We know that nothing is created or destroyed. We live by the law of freedom, and the law of freedom is the law of transmutation. Therefore, do not destroy oneself on the path of initiation, but rather transmute. Call all of one's members into alignment. For to win 100 victories in 100 battles is not the acme of skill. To subdue the enemy without fighting is the acme of skill. When the dweller on the threshold is bound, subdued, we realize we have invested in that carnal mind for thousands of years a tremendous quantity of energy that has its point of origin in the desire body. A source of tremendous strength is invested in the synthetic self. We are warriors of peace going forth to bind that enemy. But we desire to take the enemy intact and strip him of that power restoring that power and all creativity which belongs to God, to our own Christ self and our I am presence, so that we may use it for what it should be used, which is the healing of the body, all of our diseases, to give us the full strength we need to carry on the path of our Christhood. We have allowed our members to become divided, and that is why we lack either the skills or the intelligence or the qualities we need to conquer and to be conquering heroes. All that you need God has given you, but you have allowed the enemy to swallow it up. Now you recognize that enemy, self-created, and you will go after it, not to destroy it, to transmute it, to take back every erg of light. And when it is transmuted, it no longer has any identity. It is swallowed up in light. Thus Christ replaces Antichrist, not by the bloodbath, but by the creative intelligence of the mind of God. And therefore, in the process, you do not confuse who is oneself, who is one's enemy, and begin to heap condemnation upon your own soul and become, as they proverbially say, your own worst enemy. You take the side of the enemy and condemn the soul, and therefore lose more of your strength once you have engaged in this personal Armageddon. This strategy is very important to understand, because you can make much more progress than you have thus far on the path if you will simply look logically at what you are doing on the battleground of your own consciousness. Thus, what is of supreme importance in war is to attack the enemy's strategy. The enemy's strategy is the point of the serpentine mind that began with the first lie. And the first lie was fear. Fear of God, fear of coexistence with Him, doubt in Him and His ability to conduct our lives. Fear and doubt, the seeds that ultimately manifest as betrayal. So we go after the dweller on the threshold or the beast in the forest intelligently. We do not want the beast to overtake us. This is why it says, let sleeping dogs lie. Or to awaken the sleeping serpent is to encounter the full viciousness of that serpent. We're going after the point of strategy. The point of strategy, as David knew, is the point of cogitation and of vision. It is right here at the third eye, right at that point of the focalization of consciousness. That is the point of the origin of the enemy. That is the point where the enemy begins to have an identity apart from the mind of God. It is the misuse of the third eye chakra. It is the perversion of that chakra. The enemy's strategy is the enemy's logic. Serpent had a logic in the garden. Thus Mother Mary, the cosmic virgin, the mother of the world, comes to teach us what is the strategy of serpent, what is the strategy of the sons of God. If we understand his strategy, why he is speaking to us the way he is speaking to us, what is his objective, what is he trying to get from us, how is he trying to control us, we cannot in any way be defeated by that enemy. So when you look at an individual who embodies evil or the Antichrist, and you know the vibration is not good, and you know this is the consciousness of serpent, but then this serpent comes smiling and offers you an irresistible deal or a scheme to draw you into his economic arena, and then you say to yourself, in self-condemnation, I shouldn't be criticizing this person because obviously his intentions are good. See how he is smiling. See how he is nice to me. See how he is offering me the sun, the moon, and the stars. Why do I doubt him? This is the point where you need to know yourself, the seat of the conscious mind of Christ, and you need to know the enemy, which is the carnal mind, and it's anybody's carnal mind. yours, mine, or anybody else's, is the enemy of the light in all of us. So there is a common denominator of the carnal mind, and it has its strategy, and Mark Prophet called this strategies in darkness. And they do exist. It is important to number them and list them and keep a notebook, because when you discover them and when you expose them in yourself or in others, now you have learned another formula. You have learned another point of the strategy that is at the seat of that conscious mind, that logic. Thus, if one can understand the lie of serpent, of the fallen angels and the watchers, we can understand what they are after. We can learn the modus operandi of how they go after it step by step. We ourselves taking a step back, having surrendered the not self in ourselves to the best of our ability, we will see objectively what is the array of forces, what are the momentums that we must deal with. Knowing our friends, the hosts of the Lord, we know how to use the science of the spoken word and how to wield the sword that divides the real from the unreal. It is a deft sword that is wielded by the word. The sword comes out of his mouth. To separate the tares and wheat of consciousness, one must overcome one of the enemy's strategies that is called sympathy. We enter into sympathy with the individual that we know is the enemy. We feel sorry for him because he has aligned himself with the side of unreality and the synthetic image, and we say, well, I don't want to be unkind to this person. And so pretty soon we find that this person is swallowing up more and more of ourselves, our family, our children, our livelihood, our money. And we realize that we cannot have sympathy for the carnal mind, but it must be taken over by Christ and swallowed up with light. And if the individual who has free will and is in conscious control of his own citadel will not likewise surrender that point of the carnal mind, then we must say, my friend, let us part in peace. I cannot agree with your stand in this area, and therefore I cannot work with you, because your strategy to accomplish this lacks the integrity of the Christ whom I serve. So we need to understand that there is a dividing of the way in life, just as there is a dividing of the way within ourselves. We put far from ourselves those things that ought not to be, and therefore we cannot, through sympathy, tolerate them in those who present themselves to us as the downtrodden, the woe is me type of enemy. Give me your light. Help me in the name of Christ. What is of supreme importance in war is to attack the enemy's strategy. The Grand Duke said, "He who excels at resolving difficulties does so before they arise. He who excels in conquering his enemies triumphs before threats materialize." Now this is a very important point. Saint Germain was saying to me that one of the problems that the Great White Brotherhood has with its chelas in embodiment is that we are continually dealing with the physical octave. Things precipitate when they are the most concrete, then we scramble and go after them and do our dynamic decrees. There are 4 quadrants of precipitation, the etheric, mental, emotional, and physical quadrants. The point of strategy is the drawing of forces and momentums. At the etheric level, it is the probing of the computer of the mind of God, or the computer of the fallen ones, the subconscious. Bringing together the available forces and resources to tackle a problem. At the point of the 3 o'clock line, the strategy is formulated, and that is the point of the enemy's strategy, where the computer has fed back and has put together a plan of action that is feasible and practical. The point of the 3 o'clock line is the point of the planning and the reasoning and the moving together of one's forces based on the givens that are to be discovered in the memory bank of one's causal body, one's etheric body, and the planetary etheric body. What do we have to work with? When these are lined up, we formulate a strategy. So the point of strategy on the 3 o'clock line is the optimum moment to deal with the enemy. And therefore, in order to do so, one must trace oneself back through one's own physical manifestation, from the physical through the emotional body, back to the mental. One has to understand the logic of how plans come into being, and for this a knowledge of geometry, a knowledge of logic, of a theory or a hypothesis and the proving of it, a given premise and its conclusion. It takes study, and it takes study of the minds of the people of this earth, the mind of God, the mind of the ascended masters, to understand how a plan for practical action can be formulated and how to understand and calculate that it will succeed. Strategy is this. And there's only one place that a son of God can get strategy, and that is in the threefold flame of his own heart. It comes all the way back full circle to the attainment of the Christ consciousness and the development of the threefold flame. One cannot formulate strategy without the Christ consciousness, and therefore the enemy, who is antichrist, perverts the Christ consciousness in his strategy. And you find, therefore, that the enemy's strategy is the other side of the logic of the Christ mind. It is the logic of the Christ mind inverted. It is like the dark side of the moon. It is the upside-down consciousness. Study the writings of Lenin. Study Marx. Study Trotsky. Understand the way they drew conclusions, and you will see what I am speaking about as the inside-out version of the logic of the mind of Jesus Christ. Resolving difficulties before they arise takes experience. It takes experience to know everything that could go wrong in a given situation, and then to head it off at the pass and deal with it before it starts precipitating in the physical octave. The place where alchemy is easiest is from the 3 to the 9 o'clock line, between the mental and the emotional body. Once something becomes physical, it is very difficult to undo. Take the Berlin Wall. There were hours and days when the Allies could have stopped the Soviet Union from putting up that wall. The strategy was not there. There was hesitancy, a pulling back, even cowardice, a failure to commit oneself to principle and challenge the bluff. And it was a bluff, but it worked. It was a capitulation because of a non-internalization of principle, the principle of the living word. Thus the Berlin Wall was erected. And then it became a wall throughout Germany. And every year they add new things to that wall to outsmart anyone and everyone who might come up with a strategy for freedom and for escape. And each time one has a strategy, they eliminate the possibility of anyone else using that same strategy twice. It is sickening to think of the ground, the territory of this planet that has been lost to the communists because the Western powers and leaders have not pursued an in-depth analysis of the strategy of peace and war as executed by the Lord Jesus Christ, as formulated by the ancient Chinese Sun Tzu from the mind of Confucius and Lord Lanto. And the best way to prove this strategy is within your own temple and your own world. And then you will qualify for leadership If commensurate with this, you do indeed develop that threefold flame by obedience to every other requirement of the great law. Attack plans at their inception. In the later Han, Ko's son surrounded Cao Chun. Chun sent his planning officer Huang Fu Wen to parley. Huang Fu Wen was stubborn and rude, and Ku's son beheaded him and informed Cao Chun, "Your staff officer was without propriety. I have beheaded him. If you wish to submit, do so immediately. Otherwise, defend yourself." On the same day, Chun threw open his fortifications and surrendered. Think of a momentum that comes out of your own subconscious that challenges your Christ self. Think of the momentum of that carnal self that is stubborn and rude, impudent and challenging when the voice of Christ speaks within the temple, or the voice of authority of your own hierarch, the ascended Master Moria or Saint Germain. Notice how the reaction of the carnal mind will be aggressively and hatefully pitted against the fullness of the light of God when God does make a demand upon one to offer a little more striving and to go the last mile. This strategy was to behead him, instantaneously decapitate that vice. This will cause the rest of the subconscious to tremble in fear and to come under submission to your Christ self, because the action is so fierce and quick. It does not tolerate, it does not engage the enemy. It does not allow it any room to continue. It says, "You have been an affront to the office of my own Christhood, be gone." And therefore, the challenge to the rest of that human creation: if you wish to submit, do so immediately, otherwise defend yourself. You ought to try this and see how quickly you become the master of your temple. The dallying and the indulgence, the hesitation of this 2 o'clock line of fear, doubt, human questioning, and records of death is an amazing brake on the chariot of your ascension. It holds you back. Indecision and self-pity on that 6 o'clock line. Some people fool around for years and years with that stubborn and rude and impudent side of themselves that indulges in some bad habit and lets it go on and on and on. Every other foe in one's house, including in your own world, your family, your household, sees the weakness and takes advantage of it and rides in through it and overtakes and overcomes. It's like a leaky roof. One leak in the structure of the law and the whole law is compromised. Thus your children, which can be thought of as the offspring of your mind, do not respect you because you are not true to yourself. So you do not respect yourself, the enemy does not respect you, and you still fool around embodying over and over again, compromising that circle of identity. All Kusan's generals said, "May we ask, you killed his envoy, but yet forced him to surrender his city. How is this?" Kosun said, "Huang Fu Wen was Cao Chun's heart and guts, his intimate counselor. If I had spared Huang Fu Wen's life, he would have accomplished his schemes. But when I killed him, Cao Chun lost his guts. It is said, the supreme excellence in war is to attack the enemy's plans." All the generals said, "This is beyond our comprehension." The key exponent of the planetary sinister force in you is your own carnal mind. The planetary momentums and the fallen ones are encouraged when you do not behead that carnal mind, the point of its strategy, the point of its logic. So when you find the one that is the key to the general's victory, he is the one that must be wiped out. This is the strategy of the warriors of peace. Now, what is the key to the overtaking of America? We know. Isn't it drugs, rock, abortion, manipulation of the economy? These personifications of consciousness that have become large still go back to one single point of the perversion of the third eye. We need to take our sling as David and hurl it at the very point of the strategy of the enemy. Yes, we have let it grow and become physical, until finally Bush said that he would take the entire military forces of this nation to move against drugs and to engage in the war on drugs. We have been saying that from the platform for at least 5 years. But the problem is, unless they spend enough money and give enough equipment and organize and have effective leadership of the Christ consciousness in those teams that are going out now to fight drugs, they will not win. And right now, our own Coast Guard in Miami is not equipped, not nearly as equipped as the drug dealers themselves. Simple strategy for peace and war is not followed. Know the enemy, know yourself. The enemy, who are the importers and smugglers of drugs, have much more going for them. Their materiel, their planes, their boats, their radios, all of their systems. We don't have enough troops. We don't have enough police. We don't have enough of the military we are committing to the project to win. Well, where then is the enemy? The enemy is within oneself. It's somewhere lurking in the halls of our government. It's somewhere there. And the strategy of the warriors of peace is to go out and move against the enemy of our victory. The enemy that is within must be found right at the point of the seat of the conscious mind of that dweller on the threshold of our nation. It's going to be a threshold of victory if we bind the dweller sitting on the threshold of the door of consciousness to the superconscious mind. And someone is standing in the door blocking our way to the victory in the war on drugs. So in addition to giving our decrees, we need to have a scientific understanding of who and what is behind this defeatism we find in America when we say we're going to defeat drugs, but we don't do it. So we always have two enemies, the enemy arrayed without, the enemy within. And Lincoln said we would be destroyed by the enemy within and never from without. And it is proving to be true in America because the people lack understanding. They lack the will to implement what understanding they have, and they lack the love to infire their hearts with such determination and fervor that the very love itself is the fuel for the battle of every day. Without the threefold flame, we can do nothing. Without me, Jesus said, you can do nothing, absolutely nothing. Without Christ in you, you have no hope of glory, of the glorification of God in yourself, your members, and the serving of your fellow man. So you cannot be a ministering servant if you do not have that threefold flame. All of the books have already been written with a formula for the victory of planet Earth. They are not being applied because the leaders are not there and the followers are not there. This is what we propose to do through the education of the heart, through our Montessori schools, through Summit University. But even this we cannot accomplish if some do not come forward who have the heart to serve and to strive in the capacity of teacher, in the capacity of leader and follower in these very goals. No thing that the masters propose can be accomplished if there are not those who have the integrated personality in God, which we learned about through the dictations of our Easter conference. The integrated personality of God is one who has externalized the Christ consciousness, is one in whom there burns a threefold flame that is in action day after day. The integrated personality in God, that is the point of the conscious mind in action. Plans are formulated and put in motion in the mental body, and the sacred labor occurs in the third quadrant, which we call the emotional body. It is well to think of the third quadrant as the quadrant of desire, because the bottom line of action of people on earth is that we do what we want. Our desires move us. If we have a desire, we do something. If we lack the desire, we do not make the effort. We sit. All of us have to contain, more or less, some element of desire to do what we are doing right here in Montana. To be together under this tent, all of us had to contain the desire to be here. Those who did not contain the desire did not come. Your sacred labor, your profession, your work, your life is how you can read what your desire is. Maybe things are ambivalent. Maybe you go this way and then the other way. Maybe you haven't charted the course of your destiny. Maybe you haven't begun in the computer of the mind of God, in the etheric octave, drawn the forces together, formulated a strategy for life. And therefore, when it comes to the sacred labor of applying the desire, you're not one-pointed because you haven't gone through the lawful cycles. Everything is in flux between the mental and the emotional body. This very moment, we can change our thought. We can change our feeling. Instantly, in the presence of the mind of Christ, we can have a new be attitude. We can harness our feelings and our desires to the will of God. But once we have committed an act, spent our money, which is the essence of our desire, harnessed ourselves to this or that project, gone in this direction, we are basically committed. We're into the physical octave. We have tied ourselves and locked ourselves into this or that situation. At that point, it is more difficult to undo. This is why the strategy is to attack the enemy's plans. Now, if you do not do this, and the enemy moves forward with his plans, if you haven't nipped him in the bud, the next best thing is to disrupt his alliances. His alliances are his forces. Those who move with him, those who support him, those who multiply his plan and put it into action. Do not allow your enemies to get together. Don't allow all your bad habits to get together and overtake you and destroy your body, your mind, or your soul. Look into the matter of his alliances and cause them to be severed and dissolved. If an enemy has alliances, the problem is grave and the enemy's position strong. If he has no alliances, the problem is minor and the enemy's position weak. We can see this in dealing with children. We help them to overcome one by one. The older they grow, the more all of their forces are moving in one direction. Their alliances are set. It is much more difficult to break a momentum of stubbornness as that stubbornness becomes more and more concrete in human habit patterns. So the enemy of Christ in the child must be dealt with early, before conception. Before conception, we deal with the enemy of the child. We deal with the enemy within ourselves. And we make the calls for that child in Christ to overcome the momentums of the past before he is even born, before even the full 9 months are complete. meeting the strategy before it becomes physical. The next best, if you cannot disrupt the enemy's alliances, is to attack his army. He who struggles for victory with naked blades is not a good general. Battles are dangerous affairs. If you cannot nip his plans in the bud or disrupt his alliances when they are about to be consummated, sharpen your weapons to gain the victory. Sharpen the mind of Christ within yourself. Sharpen your use of the science of the spoken word. Call upon all of the forces of heaven to save the soul of that child, your own soul. Sharpen the blades. Sharpen the mind of understanding and go after it with the full alliance of your own forces, of your own Christhood. To be divided within oneself is self-defeating. How can you overcome an army of the enemy if you yourself are divided? The worst policy is to attack cities. Attack cities only when there is no alternative. To prepare the shielded wagons and make ready the necessary arms and equipment requires at least 3 months. To pile up earthen ramps against the walls, an additional 3 months will be needed. If the general is unable to control his impatience and orders his troops to swarm up the wall like ants, 1/3 of them will be killed without taking the city. Such is the calamity of these attacks. Thus, in strategy, we find that unless the general have the balanced threefold flame, he will not observe the practical and the effective, and thus one can lose one's forces. You know how this is done within oneself. Without proper and necessary preparation, sometimes we tackle something and we fail to overcome what we should be overcoming or to complete the task because we haven't prepared, we haven't assessed our forces. In the later Wei, the Emperor Tai Wu led 100,000 troops to attack the Sung general Sang Chi at Yutai. The emperor first asked San Chi for some wine. San Chi sealed up a pot full of urine and sent it to him. Tai Wu was transported with rage and immediately attacked the city, ordering his troops to scale the walls and engage in close combat. Corpses piled up to the top of the walls, and after 30 days of this, the dead exceeded half his force. Thus those skilled in war subdue the enemy's army without battle. They capture his cities without assaulting them and overthrow his state of consciousness without protracted operations. They conquer by strategy. In the latter Han, the Marquis of San, Sang Ku, surrounded the Yao rebels at Wanwu, but during a succession of months was unable to take the city. His officers and men were ill and covered with ulcers. The king of Tonghai spoke to Sang Kung, saying, "Now you have amassed troops and encircled the enemy, who is determined to fight to the death. This is no strategy. You should lift the siege. Let them know that an escape route is open, and they will flee and disperse. Then any village constable will be able to capture them." Sang Kung followed this advice and took Quan Wu. Your aim must be to take all under heaven intact. You want the child intact. You want to defeat the enemy of the child within himself and within society. But you do not want to destroy the child in the process. And psychologically, you can destroy a child by condemnation, by cruelty, by subtle measures and tactics. And instead of destroying the enemy of the child, the condemnation heaped upon him is the destruction of his mind and his psychology, whereby he himself must conquer himself. We cannot all rush from this tent with our steeds, galloping in every different direction, not knowing the way to go or who is the enemy or what is the strategy. We must understand the seat of the conscious mind. We must understand the human consciousness and the Christ consciousness, and this community, in the name of Saint Germain, must have a strategy for victory in peace and in war. And this teaching of Sun Tzu must be studied and implemented by each and every wise son and daughter of God. Your aim must be to take all under heaven intact. Thus your troops are not worn out, and your gains will be complete. This is the art of offensive strategy. Consequently, the art of using troops is this: when 10 to the enemy's 1, surround him. When five times his strength, attack him. If my force is 5 times that of the enemy, I alarm him to the front, surprise him to the rear, create an uproar in the east, and strike in the west. If double his strength, divide him. If a 2-to-1 superiority is insufficient to manipulate the situation, we use a distracting force to divide his army. Therefore, the Grand Duke said, if one is unable to influence the enemy to divide his forces, he cannot discuss unusual tactics. If equally matched, you may engage him. In these circumstances, only the able general can win. If weaker numerically, be capable of withdrawing. Jesus said, agree with thine enemy quickly whilst thou art in the way with him. When you are confronted by an overpowering serpent, a dinosaur in the woods, or a grizzly bear, agree with him. Recognize that you are weaker numerically in that moment, and you will have to retract, summon your forces, and develop a new strategy to conquer. Discretion is the better part of valor. You don't rush in where angels fear to tread. You assess the situation and determine how you are going to overcome. If you start marching with banners on some of our social issues, you could bring down the whole nation against you. Do you remember Anita Bryant? And all of the gays in the whole nation came down upon her. She did not have the forces to deal with it. It broke up her marriage. And she finally capitulated. And what did she gain? She gained a display of fanaticism against a certain group in our society, which in and of themselves also have the gift of free will from God. And therefore, what is the strategy? The strategy is enlightenment. Take the enemy intact, turn him upside down, and get him on your side. But to simply lunge at a wall or at an enemy, and then to arouse that enemy and bring down a house of cards upon oneself, is really to be stupid, to betray the brotherhood, and to expose within oneself the hatred of the mother and the failure syndrome. One must be a strategist, and one must watch the tendency toward bravado. The same is true in attacking problems of education. Sometimes moving in full force against those whose consciousness is aligned with liberal philosophies and humanist strategies is not the way. But to be the Buddha and the teacher, to have the power of conversion of the Holy Spirit, the enemy's armies will lay down their weapons and kneel before the Lord of Shambhala. Thus we are warriors in peace and in war. If we find ourselves in a war, we fight. But yet we use the strategy of the faithful and true. Mohandas Gandhi himself had a strategy for war, and he said when all else failed, it might become necessary to take up arms. One doesn't often hear about this corollary to his peace movement. If weaker numerically, be capable of withdrawing. If your troops do not equal his, temporarily avoid his initial onrush. Probably later you can take advantage of a soft spot. Then rouse yourself and seek victory with determined spirit. Determined spirit. That determination is the desire body that moves and determines that it will find the strategy, the point of the all-seeing eye of God, to undo the perversion of that eye on the part of the enemy. The determination to win is the marshaling of one's forces at one-pointedness. If you really want to win in the battle of life, you will make sacrifices. You will take that Kundalini fire and you will raise it all the way up the chakras, and you will deliver it with a full fire of the heart. And by the fire of the heart, drawing down the light of your I Am presence, raising the mother flame within you, the power of the heart is invincible. It is the sacred heart of Jesus that was the victor on the cross. If the enemy is strong and I am weak, I temporarily withdraw and do not engage. This is the case when the abilities and courage of the generals and the efficiency of troops are equal. If I am in good order and the enemy is in disarray, if I am energetic and he careless, then even if he be numerically stronger, I can give battle. Thus, the projection of chaos, disorder, disarray in the enemy camp is one of the strategies of the warriors of peace. One can defeat anyone who is disorganized. Take yourself when you are disorganized. Can you summon any forces to get anything done in a given day or situation? That's why people take courses in personal management. The organization of one's time, energy, skills, and life is the bottom of the challenge of being a victor, and each one of us must do it. And if in all respects unequal, be capable of eluding him. Outfox him, elude him. Don't let him get near you while you are in that point of vulnerability because of inequality. For a small force is but booty for one more powerful. The Brotherhood has always taught us, do not let the enemy of the carnal mind in anyone lure you into battle on his ground. Never meet the enemy on his ground. Make him meet you on your ground, which is the force field of the Christ consciousness. Once you descend to the level of the logic of serpent, you have to use the logic of serpent to defeat the serpent. Once you are on his ground, if you force the serpent where you are, then the Christ in you will defeat him. He is no match for the Christ in the field of the Christ consciousness. Mencius said, "The small certainly cannot equal the large, nor can the weak match the strong, nor the few the many." Now the general is the protector of the state. If this protection is all-embracing, the state will surely be strong. If defective, the state will certainly be weak. A sovereign who obtains the right person prospers. One who fails to do so will be ruined. Thus one begins to understand the immense responsibility of leadership. The point of responsibility. The farther you go on the path, the more people for whom you are responsible, the greater the defeat when you are irresponsible, when you do not prepare, when you do not organize, when you leave out details, when you do not plan a strategy. To hold a simple meeting or a conference, or to do what we have done here, to mobilize ourselves in the middle of nowhere, where there was nothing till we came. This involves strategy. The strategy that is focalized not in just one person, but a number of capable leaders in this organization, and a number of experts in various departments that have expertise in their areas. We trust all goes well because we trust the God in the individual. We trust the disciples that they sense the immensity of the responsibility to create a platform where Saint Germain can speak and deliver his word. You combine the strategy of putting on the conference with the strategy that each and every one of you has had to figure out to be here, to manage your life, resources, families, businesses, to come together, and you see a vast strategy from the cosmic computer of the mind of God, the great divine director's causal body. A combination of strategies has produced and is producing a victory in our midst. Without the ascended masters as the true generals in the field, I myself would wonder who I was following, because I am a follower and I am a listener. I realize some people look to me as a leader, but I'm only a leader insofar as I am a follower. And if I cease to follow my leader, we all fall down. So look at yourself. See how many bright and shining faces are following your example, because you do not fail to see that any strategy will fail if you don't take care of the details. Thus it all goes back to the top. At the top of the pyramid we look to El Moria, we look to Saint Germain, we look to Lanello. Each one of us is a part of God. To know the whole strategy, we need to tie into the whole mind of God, manifesting in the great white brotherhood, ascended and unascended. I don't know the total strategy of God. I hope I know my part of it. But the key to my own victory is that I do what I'm told. I obey the orders of the Knight Commander. And I don't ask questions, so I don't always know why he is telling me to do what I am doing. But I know if I take that step, that very step itself will be self-revealing, and we will see the next and the next. Each of us, therefore, as a general or as a follower, walks by faith. And when we act on the principle of the law and the person we know who embodies the law and follow our hearts, we are nearest right. And that's all any of us can do, is be the nearest right, the right we can perceive, and act upon it. Now there are 3 ways in which a ruler can bring misfortune upon his army. Listen to this, all of you rulers, sitting in the seat of your Christ self. When ignorant that the army should not advance, to order an advance, or ignorant that it should not retire, to order a retirement. This is described as hobbling the army. Failure to tie into the troops, the co-workers, the staff. Failure to be sensitive to their hearts, their needs, their capacities, their strengths, their energies. The leader must know how far to push the army. He must know more than the army, just how much they can strive and transcend themselves. You need to know how far you can push yourself. You need to know what your reserve forces are within you, what you can call upon when necessary to have the most important victory of your life. And if you are not in training and haven't proven to yourself in lesser matters just how much light you can summon, if you indulge yourself, your 4 lower bodies, or your own children, you will find at the moment when they should reach and push and grasp the torch that they will fall back and say, I can't, when really they can, if they understand the limitless resources available to the one who vows to conquer. The advance and retirement of the army, the yin, the yang, the in and the out cycles. What is the need of the moment? The advance and retirement of the army can be controlled by the general in accordance with prevailing circumstances. No evil is greater than commands of the sovereign from the court. When ignorant of military affairs, to participate in their administration, this causes the officers to be perplexed. It's important to know when you don't know when you are a leader. I listen to the advice of department heads. I ask them to assess the possible. Simply giving commands when one is totally ignorant of what it takes to accomplish something is the act of an unwise sovereign. One can only direct when one has an understanding of what one is directing. And therefore, many times people say to me, "What shall I do?" Well, I don't know what you should do because I don't understand fully your circumstances. Go to your general. Go to your Christ self and figure out logically and practically what you should be doing. Therefore, run your own businesses. Direct your own life, your own community, your own households, your own factories. Don't ask me to offer advice out of the blue. You probably know much more about what you should be doing than I do. But I can always pray for you. I can always call for all of the ascended masters to intercede and help you. And I can incline my ear to hear your story and your plan and see if I have an idea. But maybe I won't have an idea. So analyzing this from my position, which each of you in your own way and your own circle of influence holds that position of sovereign, you need to realize when you should not be giving advice. When you don't know enough to advise, don't. Because it puts the freedom flame back on the individual, and he has the resources, and he will make the right decision. And even if something seems to go adversely as the result of a decision he makes, it still may not be a mistake, because given his resources, he needs to learn to live with the decision he makes, and therefore to desire from calamities to improve his knowledge, his wisdom, his awareness, his ability to make decisions. So there's a learning curve, and we all need to make mistakes. And none of us should condemn each other for our mistakes, because we needed to make them to get up and walk a straight path. So even a mistake might be the right answer in some cases. After all, if you watch little children between the ages of 1 and 3, you couldn't even count the amount of times they fall down before they truly learn to walk. We consider it normal. Walking is one of the most major accomplishments in the entire life of an individual. It defies gravity. It's extremely difficult to walk, to deal with the balance of forces in nature and in ourselves. And we expect toddlers to fall down until they master the art. And when they do, we and they think nothing of it. So, if you make mistakes mastering the greatest path of initiation there ever was, realize that it too is defying the laws of gravity, defying the carnal mind, and you are learning to be a strategist. So give yourself that freedom, but not indulgence. Give yourself freedom, but not indulgence. And learn the difference. An army cannot be run according to rules of etiquette. You remember the American soldiers in the Revolution, how they outsmarted the British troops? The old ways of war was that everybody lined up in rows on the battlefield, and at the signal, they would all shoot. Well, the Americans hid in the bushes and overtook the British there in Boston, and changed the entire art of war from that moment on. An army cannot be run according to rules of etiquette. As far as propriety, laws, and decrees are concerned, the army has its own code, which it ordinarily follows. If these are made identical with those used in governing a state, the officers will be bewildered. Benevolence and righteousness may be used to govern a state, but cannot be used to administer an army. Expediency and flexibility are used in administering an army, but cannot be used in governing a state. So you are flexible, ready to change your plan of action at any moment it is necessary. The expedient is what must be done now to accomplish an immediate physical goal. Etiquette, benevolence, righteousness. Sometimes we hear chelas complaining that Moria is too harsh. They want every command to be preceded by a please, or by a story, or by an explanation. Meanwhile, we can lose the battle. So we need to learn to take the commands of our Christ self. We need to learn how to be direct to get a job done. And when we are on the receiving end, we have to understand that sometimes we move as an army and sometimes we move as the kingdom of God. And we need to understand the difference between the community lifestyle and interchange and the lifestyle of the army and the troops, which are the accelerating ones that are forging ahead, claiming new territory, conquering, and so forth. Expediency and directness. When ignorant of command problems, to share in the exercise of responsibilities. This engenders doubts in the minds of the officers. When someone who is ignorant of command problems shares in the exercise of responsibilities, this engenders doubts in the minds of the officers. Thus, there needs to be a co-equality amidst those who are exercising that decision-making power which we must have in order to move forward as one. If one ignorant of military matters is sent to participate in the administration of the army, then in every movement there will be disagreement and mutual frustration, and the entire army will be hamstrung. That is why Pi II memorialized the throne to withdraw the army supervisor. Only then was he able to pacify Cao Chu. In recent times, court officials have been used as supervisors of the army, and this is precisely what is wrong. We have seen how presidents of this nation, who function as the commander-in-chief but often do not have a military background, have been involved in making decisions and strategies of war to the undoing of all that the army has gained. You remember that MacArthur was called back from Korea because he determined to move and charge ahead and gain a total victory, and the president determined that he should not. So it was the president who held sway. We know that Roosevelt, Stalin, Churchill carved up Europe. Our own president was making military decisions. And there was often a division between the generals in the field and the White House. This is a great danger to our nation. It has been extremely costly. We know that Roosevelt lost Pearl Harbor because he made a military decision. He issued an ultimatum that could not be met. Japan attacked. He knew about the attack days in advance, and he came upon the strategy to let Japan attack Pearl Harbor, perhaps by thinking that it would galvanize the nation to enter the war and move against the Axis powers. Perhaps his strategy was better to lose that portion of the Navy and the armed forces and to use it as a psychological maneuver to draw the nation together. We realize that to become a military strategist in the ultimate sense of real wars on the planet takes training. And just because someone is elected to office, either as president or as a cabinet member, appointed or in Congress, does not make him qualified to make decisions in war. And this is one thing that the communists know, because the communists follow Sun Tzu to the letter. And this is how Mao took over China, by this very strategy. If the army is confused and suspicious, neighboring rulers will cause trouble. This is what is meant by the saying, a confused army leads to another's victory. Confusion, it's on the 6 o'clock line of the mother of Sanat Kumara. It is the mother's legions, the armies in matter, that win. They are divided and conquered by confusion. The wrong person cannot be appointed to command. Kaukua is merely able to read his father's books and is as yet ignorant of correlating changing circumstances. Now, Your Majesty, on account of his name, makes him the commander-in-chief. This is like gluing the pegs of a lute and then trying to tune it. The wrong person cannot be appointed to command. How often we have seen this be a problem. Now there are 5 circumstances in which victory may be predicted. He who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. He who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. He who understands how to use both large and small forces will be victorious. There are circumstances in war when many cannot attack few, and others when the weak can master the strong. One able to manipulate such circumstances will be victorious. He whose ranks are united in purpose will be victorious. The appropriate season is not as important as the advantages of the ground. These are not as important as harmonious human relations. He who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not will be victorious. Create an invincible army and await the enemy's moment of vulnerability. That sounds like Lord Maitreya himself. An invincible army of Chelas of the light take advantage of the vulnerability of the fallen ones. And they do have their vulnerability, and their vulnerability is their pride. Pride goeth before the fall. We need to know when the enemy is at the peak of his pride, and that is the point of the attack, even of the science of the spoken word. A gentleman said, "To rely on rustics and not prepare is the greatest of crimes. To be prepared beforehand for any contingency is the greatest of virtues." I think Saint Germain has designated this land to be prepared for any contingency, to form an army of light, to unite us, and thereby have the maximum strength for whatever it is that he desires to do. He is the Knight Commander, and how we appreciate his wisdom. He whose generals are able and not interfered with by the sovereign will be victorious. Therefore, Master Wang said, "To make appointments is the province of the sovereign, to decide on battle, that of the general." When I appoint an expert to do a job for me, I tell him to make the decisions. I listen, I hear the advice, I hear the reasons why, and if in my layman's understanding I do not perceive loopholes, and I have no prompting from on high, then I say, "You know your business, you make the decision." If I do have a prompting, but I cannot pinpoint it because I do not have the expertise, I ask for more research, more discovery, more finding out, and I ask for the flaw in the plan to be revealed to those involved or to me. And if that doesn't work, I demand that the will of God and beloved El Moria prevent whatever it is that is contemplated from happening if it is not the will of God. And therefore, if we are about to take a step that is unwise, and we have made that fervent call, El Moria never lets it come to pass. He always stops us from taking imprudent action or unwise action if we wisely make the call, surrender our will to His, and accept the consequences. If something hoped for doesn't come through, we accept it as His wisdom and go on and look for the door, look for the opening that He wants us to find as the best way to move forward, the best way to use our contributions, our treasury, to do the most good for the most numbers in the wisest way. A sovereign of high character and intelligence must be able to know the right man, should place the responsibility on him, and expect results. Now you think about that when you have to do a job that takes more than one, and you're in charge. The people you select for the team need to be people that can get a job done. Now in war there may be 100 changes in each step. When one sees he can, he advances. When he sees that things are difficult, he retires. To say that a general must await commands of the sovereign in such circumstances is like informing a superior that you wish to put out a fire. Before the order to do so arrives, the ashes are cold. And it is said one must consult the army supervisor in these matters! Exclamation point. This is as if in building a house beside the road, one took advice from those who pass by. Of course, the work would never be completed. To put a rein on an able general while at the same time asking him to suppress a cunning enemy is like tying up the black hound of Han and then ordering him to catch elusive hares. What is the difference? It is in these 5 matters that the way to victory is known. Therefore I say, know the enemy and know yourself. In 100 battles you will never be in peril. When you are ignorant of the enemy but know yourself, your chances of winning or losing are equal. If ignorant both of your enemy and of yourself, you are certain in every battle to be in peril. Such people are called mad bandits. What can they expect if not defeat? I'd like to read you those 5 points. He who knows when he can fight and when he cannot will be victorious. That's number 1. Number 2, he who understands how to use both large and small forces will be victorious. Number 3, he whose ranks are united in purpose will be victorious. That's all of the energies of your 4 lower bodies and your chakras. All of your ranks are united in one purpose. 4, he who is prudent and lies in wait for an enemy who is not will be victorious. And 5, he whose generals are able and not interfered with by the sovereign will be victorious. Now the sovereign in you is your free will, and your general is your Christ self. So if you let yourself sit in the seat of your sovereign free will and move against your general who knows exactly how to win the battle against the carnal mind, you are obviously going to lose. Our sovereign free will must be turned over to the expert and the experts. When we want to do something in the area of our youth, we call upon Leto, or Venus, or Meta, or Mother Mary. When we want action on the strategy for the ascension, we turn over that sovereign free will to Serapis Bey. When we want to know how to get on with expanding freedom, we turn our sovereign free will over to the General Saint Germain, and so on and so forth. Yes, you are sovereign. You are all kings and queens. God gave you absolute, unlimited free will. You have the authority right now to do anything you want to do, anytime, anywhere. Isn't that so? Especially in the United States of America. You enjoy the greatest freedom of any people on earth. You are sovereign in your temple. So now, the wise exercise of the sovereign free will becomes our challenge. And how do we do it? We master and develop the threefold flame. And what we are doing is integrating with our general Christ self. The sovereign and the general become one. The sovereign free will, the soul that has free will, enters into the mind of the Christ self and agrees with it, learns its lessons and obeys. So, I'm going to give you a break. Run around and look at the sunshine, get some fresh air, get something to drink. It's not supper time. We're going to come right back. So when you hear the music begin, please rejoin me in the tent. God bless you. Thank you.